Now let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of single fiber contraction. So what can you record if you're recording electrical and mechanical changes of a muscle fiber? So the electrical changes are going to be the action potential that occur, while the mechanical changes are going to, we call that a twitch, where we have a period of contraction followed by a period of relaxation. So let's try to figure out what are the three main features of an isotonic twitch. There's a latent period, and that latent period is the time from where the action potential occurred and when the muscle actually started to contract. During that period of time, everything related to the excitation-contraction coupling is happening. So all of that, release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, attachment of calcium to troponin changing its shape, that whole story that we talked about in the previous segment, all of that is happening during the latent period. And then you have a period of muscle contraction, and that's where the force and the tension inside of the muscle develop, followed by a period of relaxation where the tension in the muscle goes back to zero. One thing to keep in mind is that relaxation, as you can see here, takes longer time than contraction does. Now, what is the difference between an isometric and isotonic contraction? When the muscle shortens, or when the sarcomere shortens, something out of two things would have to change. Either the tone of the muscle or the length of the muscle, not both. So in an isometric contraction, iso means the same. So isometric means constant length contraction. And that could occur, for example, during arm wrestling, where these two are in gridlock and the tension inside of the muscles are increasing, but there is no change there's no movement being produced. So that again is isometric contraction, where the length of the muscle is constant, but the tension is going up. Isotonic contraction, on the other hand, would be where there's a constant tone of the muscle. So the muscle is contracting. Let's say you are trying to flex the elbow. So the tone is the same. Nothing is going to change in the tone, but the muscle is shortening in length. Now, a frequency tension relation. So that muscle fiber can get more than one order to contract. So this relationship is talking between the frequency of the action potential in relationship to the amount of tension being produced in the muscle. The muscle will have to sum up those action potentials in a process that we've called summation. And sometimes, if there are way too many action potentials coming in, that could lead to a tetanic contraction due to the repetitive stimulation. So we'll see here what happens in this portion. Here is your first stimulus, or S1. It led to a twitch. Now S2 is going to lead to another twitch, and that is because your second stimulus came in after the first twitch happened and ended. So you have two separate twitches that occurred. But if you look at the orange graph, your first stimulus occurred while your second stimulus occurred before the muscle was able to fully relax. So the muscle had to sum them up together to produce a stronger contraction. That is known as a tetanic contraction, but there are gaps in between. There are periods of relaxation. While in this purple graph, you see that the two stimuli occurred very close to each other, so the summation led to an even stronger contraction than what would have occurred here. And there is no relaxation that you see. In order for tetanic contractions to happen, again, your stimuli have to occur close to each other. Unfused tetanus occurs when there are periods of relaxation in the middle, while fused tetanic contractions happen if the stimuli are just, they just keep on coming at a too fast of a rate where the muscle cannot relax. That fused tetanic contraction can happen during tetany, and that obviously it could be fatal if it affects the respiratory muscles. Our cardiac muscles, though, are protected against the occurrence of tetanic contractions. Now for the length-tension relationship. So that is the relationship between the length of the muscle fiber before contraction to the amount of tension that that muscle can produce. So bodybuilders or weightlifters, they are treated or trained in order to position their muscles in the best way possible to be able to carry those lifts or to carry those weights. And that is known as the optimal length. So that would be the length of the fiber that is at the optimum position in order to develop the greatest amount of tension in that muscle fiber. So I want to go ahead and maybe, take a look at how at weightlifters, how they position their fibers or their muscles in order to able to carry those heavy weights. Now, where does the skeletal muscle get all of that energy from? Okay, we obviously need lots of ATP, so how do we get it? Where do we get it from? Where there is the oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria. Okay, so Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, those happen in the mitochondria, and that would lead to the production of tons of ATP. Or we could use the glycolytic pathway in the cytoplasm. That is glycolysis, where that leads to some ATP, but not much. Or we could phosphorylate ADP. So ADP, if we add a phosphate to it, will become ATP. We can get that phosphate from creatine phosphate. We actually store phosphate as creatine phosphate in the muscle. Now, muscle fatigue is when the skeletal muscle fiber is repeatedly stimulated and then it gets to a point where the muscles can no longer contract. That is known as muscle fatigue. The muscle fatigue can be very different between individuals. Some might reach it faster. Some might, especially if they are fit, physically fit. So it does definitely depend on the degree of individual's fitness. The exact cause of muscle fatigue is really unknown, but we do think it might be due to the decrease in the concentration of ATP or due to the electrolyte imbalance. So we talked about lots of electrolytes, calcium, magnesium, or calcium and potassium and so on, sodium. So is it due to the imbalance in these electrolytes that led to muscle fatigue? Again, we are really not sure. But we do know that we have what is known as central command fatigue. And you might have seen this in marathons where these runners are running for very long periods of time and then they just get to the end and they can no longer, they've lost the motivation. They can no longer run. But as soon as, somebody comes, picks them up or cheers them on, they're motivated again and they are mentally able to complete that marathon. So that is known as central command fatigue, where the cerebral cortex fails to send these impulses through the motor neurons to the skeletal muscles to contract. And that usually happens under severe stressful situations. Now, I know we understand their skeletal muscle fiber, but we need to understand that there are different kinds of skeletal muscle fibers, depending on how fast or slow they contract. Okay, so we have fast twitch and slow twitch, and also the pathway to make ATP. So some of them are going to use the oxidative pathway, while others are going to use the glycolytic pathway. So some are just going to use glycolysis through the cytoplasm, while others are going to use the oxidative process using mitochondria. Okay, and so we have these three different kinds, and we'll talk about it, I guess, in the next slide. But this slide right here. So the oxidative fibers, okay, these are the ones that are going to go through Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. They have lots of mitochondria. They have a great ATP supply. And in order to do that, they have to have oxygen stored. Oxygen is stored in the muscle in a protein called myoglobin. So remember, the protein that carries oxygen in the blood is known as hemoglobin, while the protein that stores oxygen in the muscle is called myoglobin. Myoglobin is darker in color, and that's why these fibers are red. So you want to think like of a steak. A steak are red. Fibers have tons of myoglobin in them. They are oxidative fibers. You can compare that to a chicken muscle fibers. Okay, those are known as white muscle fibers. They are glycolytic, meaning that they will produce most of their energy through glycolysis only. They have few mitochondria, but they do have a large store of glycogen in them, because we are going to break down that glycogen into glucose in order to break down and use in the glycolytic pathway. They lack myoglobin, and that's again why they are seen as white muscle fibers. Here are the 3 different kinds again. So you have slow oxidative type 1, and those are fatigue resistant. So these fibers have, they contract slower, okay, and they have, though, a lot of mitochondria. They are darker in color because of the myoglobin in them. You want to think, when you think slow oxidative fibers, think of your back muscles. They are fatigue resistant. You are contracting your back muscles whether you're standing or sitting, and it takes a while they do resist fatigue. The intermediate fibers are known as fast oxidative glycolytic fibers. And the third kind, those are known as fast glycolytic fibers type 2X. Those fatigue very fast. Okay, know that the majority of muscles are like a combination of all 3 of them. One might be more than the other, though. If you look at these graphs, you see here that these muscle fibers have been stimulated for a whole hour. These are your slow oxidative fibers, like your back muscles, and you can see here that no fatigue, okay, it keeps on contracting. While other muscles that are fast oxidative glycolytic, they are a little bit resistant to fatigue, but they will eventually fatigue and decrease the force of the contractions and decrease the tension produced. While these fast glycolytic fibers, although they have these fast switches, but they fatigue very easily. So you want to think of a sprinter, a person that is going to do these fast runs, okay? So they sprint using these fast glycolytic fibers, okay? That'll help them sprint, and they will continue that run using those fast oxidative glycolytic fibers that are a little bit more resistant to fatigue. Here again, you see here that our muscles are really a mosaic of all 3 different kinds of fibers. Some muscles, though, would have more of one type than others. For the whole muscle to contract, that really depends on how many motor units were recruited. For example, your muscle of the back, okay, we can contract them for longer periods of time without fatigue. So those are mainly made out of, although again, there's a mosaic of all 3 different kinds of fibers, but we have a large number of the slow oxidative ones. If you compare that to the muscles in the arm, you want to be able to produce tension, for example, in a boxer, where you want these glycolytic fibers that are fast twitch to throw a punch, but then you'll finish off whatever you're doing in the arena with the other muscle fibers. Or again, the leg muscles in a fast runner, to start off with the fast glycolytic fibers to get them a head start and finish off the race with the intermediate fibers. And this ends this portion.